Welcome back. We'll now begin session 3, where we'll hear from Senator Deb Fischer, Representative Don Bacon, and Mr. Jason Hafenmeister from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Their remarks will be followed by a panel on agribusiness. And now we'll hear from Senator Deb Fischer, who has represented Nebraska in the U.S. Senate since 2013, following her service in the Nebraska legislature. She currently sits on the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. She is also a cattle rancher and a lifetime advocate for the agricultural community in Nebraska and the nation. We are honored to welcome you here today, Senator Fischer.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be with you today. I'd like to take a moment and recognize former Secretary Albright, Governor Ricketts, Ambassador Sway, and all of the other panelists and speakers for their participation today. And a special thank you to Andy Aboud. I know you've heard from many expert speakers today, each of whom has brought their own unique perspective to what is undeniably a complex issue. I'm speaking to you partly as a cattle rancher who cares deeply about the success of Nebraska agriculture. I'm also speaking as a United States Senator who sits on both the Senate Agriculture Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee. And so I'll be taking a slightly broader view of the trading relationship between our two countries. The United States and China have grown closer since President Nixon first visited the People's Republic nearly 50 years ago, and mutually beneficial trade has been an important part of our friendship. The United States and China exchange hundreds of billions of dollars of goods and services each year, including tens of billions in agricultural products. Many of those products, like soybeans, beef, and pork, are raised right here in Nebraska. I know everyone in attendance today hopes that number for our agricultural products will continue to go up. But a lot of moving parts have to fit together to make our relationship work, and we cannot pretend that potential obstacles don't exist. There are geopolitical, national security, and moral concerns that directly influence the connection between our two nations. China hasn't always followed the same rules for intellectual property as the Western world. The United States also cannot ignore the humanitarian crisis that is taking place as we speak in Xinjiang province, or the way freedom was snuffed out last year in Hong Kong. This is all to say that our bond isn't perfect. No relationship is. We have to be open and honest about the things that could get in the way of the brighter future we all hope for. But I'm happy to say that there are at least as many reasons for optimism as there are for doubt. Some had concern and anxiety leading up to last year's Phase 1 trade deal, which was truly historic. But China met many of their import targets under Phase 1 for 2020, and I thank them for that, and for continuing to move forward with even more successful agreements. I was also encouraged to learn a few weeks ago that China's corn imports from the United States are on track to shatter previous records at 28 million metric tons for the 2020 to 2021 marketing year. And of course, China is Nebraska's third largest export partner, with demand for Nebraska products reaching its highest level in history in 2020. Optimism, I think, is exactly why we are all here today. We want a better future for our two countries and for our people, and we know that we are stronger when we work together. The road from here will be long and may not always be easy, but I am confident we can reach mutually beneficial goals. Gatherings like this one where we can listen to one another's concerns as well as our hopes, are the first step. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fisher, for those remarks. And now we will hear from U.S. Representative Don Bacon, who represents Nebraska's 2nd District. Representative Bacon is a member of the House Committees on Agriculture, Armed Services, and Homeland Security. Welcome, Representative Bacon.
Hello, and welcome to the U.S. China Policy Series, this forum on agriculture trade with China at the Lincoln Marriott. I'm Congressman Don Bacon, representing the 2nd Congressional District of Nebraska, and I serve on the House Agriculture Committee. Growing up on a family farm in the Midwest, I understand how big a role agricultural trade plays in our economy. And it is vitally important here in Nebraska, where ag is the #1 industry. Expanding trade agreements is a top priority of mine on the House Agriculture Committee. And I have helped to bring representatives of other countries here, to include the Indonesia ambassador and the Danish ambassador here for trade talks. Trade with China is important, but we need to address the fairness and equitability of some of their practices. We want free trade, but we also want fair trade. Recently, I sent a letter with 35 of my House colleagues to USDA Secretary Vilsack to encourage him to enforce the Phase 1 China agreement and hold China to their agreed to agricultural purchases. We're counting on it. It's important to everyone in ag, and it's very important for all of us here in Nebraska. Thank you for attending, and again, welcome to Nebraska.
Thank you, Representative Bacon, for your remarks. And now we will hear from Mr. Jason Hafemeister, who is serving as the Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Agriculture for Trade and Foreign Agriculture.
Good afternoon. This is Jason Hafemeister from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm the Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs, and I'm grateful for the chance to speak to the conference today and share some thoughts on China. To make this a little easier, I'm also going to share some slides to illustrate some of the points that I'm making. So I want to talk, these are my kids. This is in front of my father-in-law's pigs in Nebraska. So while I'm remote, I'm thinking of Nebraska today. And I'm going to make a few reflections on our trade policy to China. I'm going to talk a little bit about the U.S. trade policy in the post-war era, talk a little bit about our posture with respect to China over the last 20 years or so, and then just a few reflections on the current moment where we're evaluating where we're going in trade policy. So first, in the post-war era, coming out of World War II, the United States led the development of international organizations like the GATT and the World Bank and the IMF, and an effort to integrate the world economy, to not only provide greater security and peace, but also to increase incomes and improve living standards. And this chart here shows the fruits of that effort. This is the global population, up above 7 billion people in 2015. And the red area shows the number of people living in extreme poverty, and the blue area are those above the poverty line. And you can see how in the post-war era, we had a real dramatic shift. Not only did the population boom as more technology was available and incomes rose that allowed people to live longer lives and better lives, but the wealth increased as well. And we could see people living above the poverty line, and those below the poverty line actually decreased. Now, that's a great thing in and of itself, but for farmers, it's also a good thing. For a competitive, export-oriented sector like the United States, this meant we had access to more customers. And you can see the green line there shows what our exports have done as we've seen this period of global growth. So we are optimistic that we can continue to see this trend. This is some data that was pulled together before COVID, but it showed another 1.7 billion people joining the middle class by 2030, as we see people exiting poor and vulnerable classes, and of course more people on the planet. So if we can get back to those trends, bouncing back from the quarantine and the pandemic, there's going to be more opportunities for us. So that's the good news for American farmers. Now, how do we take advantage of these opportunities? Well, we do it through trade agreements By lowering barriers between countries, we can expand our ability to export. This chart here shows that whenever we have done trade agreements in the United States, American farmers have been able to sell more. And so that's certainly a key to us moving forward, to accessing more customers, tightening our commercial relationships with foreign countries. Part of it is through organized trade agreements. Now, here's our top 6 markets. These are our top 6 customers. We want to make sure we do business with them. Most of these are mature markets where population growth is slowing, income growth is slowing, incomes are already high. China is the big difference. This is a market we see a lot of growth opportunity in, but we also have seen the downside when we get into trade conflict, and we can lose a market there. And so China is really the biggest foreign determinant of how our farmers going to do has been what happens in China, putting aside production and other growing risks. So China is a growing economy and a growing population, and like a lot of the other potential markets on this long tail of this curve, that's where we focus a lot of our efforts. How can we improve our access to those countries? How can we improve their ability to buy our products? That's going to be key for providing profitability for U.S. agriculture in the future. So hopefully we can keep doing it in China, and we can take some of the success in China and apply it to other markets. My proposition to you is that when we move towards more market-oriented, rules-based trade, it increases our ability to sell overseas. And that has been our experience in China, even with all the bumps and hiccups. So let me just jump right here to talk a little bit about China. So, the China experience is really unique. This goes back, several hundred years, and show for most of human history, life in China was pretty rough. But coming out of World War II and then particularly after the end of the Mao regime, we've seen income in China blossom, and that's made them really interesting market for us. So this shows GDP per capita in China. Relative, China's still not near as rich as we are. It's, coming into what we might call a middle income country. So there certainly is room to grow in terms of Chinese income and Chinese purchasing ability. So there's real potential there. But it's been a great story. Here is child mortality. 50 years ago, 20% of the children didn't reach 5 years old. Now, less than 1%. Here's stunting. This is just 30 years ago, 25% of the children under 5 years old showed signs of stunting. Right now, it's closer to 10%. And here's income. Right, the blue area are those living below $1.25 a day. The dark green area is those living above $10 a day. And so this is it's a great human story, but it's also a great market story for us. These are people that have the ability to buy our products. So how can we get access to those markets? Well, trade has increased a lot with China. This goes back to 1992. Remember, China joined the WTO in 2001. And you can see the red line there is U.S. exports. This is all goods. Have grown substantially in that period, but of course not as much as our imports from China, that blue line. So China has become a better market for us for all products, but it hasn't come without its challenges. The China shock literature from Autor, Hansen, and Dorn has made a big contribution by showing the sectors and the regional geographic distribution of parts of the United States that have suffered from increased competition. This is basically manufacturing jobs, hundreds of thousands, maybe a million or more have been lost because of import competition from China. So that's part of the story, certainly. But I'm going to focus more on the export side and U.S. exports. So here's China joined WTO in 2001. It's important to remember that before China was in the WTO, it was a very closed market. The very act of engaging in international trade was controlled by the government. You had to have permission before you bought a product from overseas or sold it to overseas. Tariffs were regulated by the government, and they could move up and down on a whim. Government requirements to import, government permissions were numerous and arbitrary. So The WTO addressed a lot of those problems. The right to trade was opened up. Trade measures became much more transparent. Government restrictions were limited and tariffs came down. Now, there's certainly a lot of problems still in our trade with China, including in agriculture. But what this chart shows is that as those barriers fell down and as China integrated into the global economy, it became a big importer of U.S. agricultural products, going from less than $1 billion a year up to $25 billion or more, our top market. Now, it's interesting to compare China with India. So what this chart here shows is total global imports into China, into India, the trade balance, imports minus exports. And you can see the difference between the two countries. In many ways, they're similar. There is 1 billion or more people. There's limited land area. They've got challenges to grow competitively, a lot of the row crops and livestock products that are traded internationally. India's remained largely closed, high tariffs that are allowed under its WTO agreement, and it's got a lot of subsidies to its producers. Just so you can see, India is a net exporter of agricultural products. They export more than they import. Contrast that with China. China is a massive net importer of agricultural products. And as you can see, the big switch was when China joined WTO. Now, not only is that because they have more rules that limit their ability to close their market, but they made a bid also on integrating into the global economy. They're exporting their manufacturers, they're importing food products. So this is what we sell to China. It's driven by soybeans. That's the blue area. A lot of these are bulk commodities. You see cereals and meats. We see potential to grow each of these. The effect that China has had on the world soybean market. 1 out of 2 U.S. soybeans is exported, and half of those exports go to China. If we could see a similar effect, if it opened up in similar ways in some of these other commodities, you can imagine the opportunities we might have. So everyone's always looking at China opportunity. But we also got to remember here, look at the dip. When the market closed with the tariffs, certainly we also lost a lot of sales. So here's our market share in China. So you can see 2010, the U.S. accounted for about 25% of China's imports of agricultural products. It'd been trending down prior to the tariff actions. We were down at about 20% of China's market. We had a market share of 20%. Then with the tariff actions, we fell down below 10. 2020, the market opened back up for us. You can see we've climbed back a bit. So just look at here, the overall growth in China's imports, right? In 2010, it was $60 billion. In 2020, it was over $140 billion. And so while we have been increasing our exports, others have been increasing more. So it's a competitive market. And as we've seen, we can be displaced. But we certainly have, this certainly is an optimistic slide too, that if we can get back closer to our historical market share, we would see a big boost in our exports. All right, so just a little bit about phase 1. We had the IPR concerns in China, led to our 301 tariffs, led to retaliation by China. The tariffs fell off. So we focused a lot on how we were doing in China. This is our total exports of the ag products under phase 1. You can see we got off to a terrible start in 2020. That's partly because the trade agreement wasn't actually signed until February. And so Chinese importers would not sign a contract before then unless they wanted to pay a tariff. So we got a slow start in the first part of 2020. But by the end of the year, we caught up to the 2017 pace, thanks to the open market, thanks to the higher prices for row crops like cereals and oilseeds, thanks to the fact that the Brazilians had basically been out of the market, filling in behind us, gave us a good opportunity. And so we got back to a record year last year in China. Just to be a little more, just to put up some of the numbers there, you can see this is Chinese import data. In 2017, it was $24 billion from us. 2020, it was almost the same. What this doesn't show is all the boats that were floating out of the United States in October, November, and December, which hadn't yet reached China in January and February. And so that's going to really boost our 2021 trade numbers. So there was a cost to the trade war, and you could see it there just in the value of trade. But I put this slide up here just to show how that is reflected. Not only did we sell less to China, for our top export to China, we were also getting worse prices. So this chart here shows U.S. and Brazilian soybean prices. The U.S. line is blue, the Brazilian line is red, and you can see they mostly track each other. It's a competitive market. We basically can get the same price. A buyer will get the same price from either of us. But when the tariffs went into place, you can see the U.S. price went down and the Brazilian price went up. And the reason really is that if U.S. soybeans were not wanted in China because of that 25% tariff, all of a sudden the Brazilian soybean became very valuable and the U.S. soybean less so. If you're a trader, you'd rather have a Brazilian soybean which you can sell to any country in the world, whereas a U.S. soybean would not be eligible into the biggest market. So you can see when the tariff exemptions came into play back in 2020, once again, our prices equalized. And then of course, we're seeing this great run up in prices in the last half of 2020, and we're still enjoying that today, which is of course helping the farmer here. So there's a couple things here. So China's market had been very closed. We get in WTO, and even though there's a lot of complaints we still have about Chinese trade practices, we did see tariffs come down, the ability to trade go up, and China remove a lot of the restrictions on selling our ag products. So it's a big opportunity for us going forward. I think as the administration is conducting their China review, and we're doing a trade review as well, how we engage with China is going to be very important. We got a lot of big questions in front of us. How are we going to handle climate? What are we going to do about fairness in trade? And so as we look to some of the core principles that have worked for us in the last 50 or 60 years, things like let's have scientific basis for measures. Let's recognize equivalent results, even if countries use different approaches to get there. That's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about globally and as well as China. So let me stop there. I know I've gone long. I just want to thank you all for the opportunity and turn it over now to your panel of experts.
Thank you, Mr. Hafemeister, for setting the stage for our final panel, which will focus on forging a path forward in the U.S. China agricultural trade relationship from an agribusiness perspective. I'm so pleased to introduce to you today Brian Sloan. He is the president of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce, a Nebraska native. Brian brings more than 3 decades of policy and business experience to the state chamber. And Brian, I'm going to let you take it from here.
That sounds great, and thank you. This has been a great day, and I've learned a lot. Although I think the number one word that comes to mind with almost every speaker and everybody who talks about this subject is complex. I'm old enough to remember at least watching the TV news when President Nixon went to China. And since then, the relationship between China and the United States has indeed been complex. But I think for agribusiness and the trade area, the last 10 years particularly has been particularly complex. And you saw those on the prior charts from 2012, which was sort of a high point, to now. There's just been a very set of factors which have been more than adequately discussed today in terms of creating a volatile level of imports and exports during that period. Without revisiting all that, I think with the final panel today, what we're going to do is try to take that look forward from an agribusiness standpoint and talk about where do we go. I know there was a panelist in the prior panel who used the word predictable. I always hesitate to use the word predictable in the ag area, but it would be nice, wouldn't it? And so I'm going to challenge our panelists today to talk a little bit about how they see the view of the world today from an agribusiness standpoint, and maybe not only how we grow U.S. ag exports to China going forward, but maybe how we become a little more predictable in the process. So I'm lucky today we have a great panel. Let me introduce them at this point, and then we're going to go around individually to each of them and give them an opportunity to talk just a little bit, and then take your questions. And please make sure to submit your questions during this conversation, and we'll try to get to those at the end, but we'll bring you in on time. So with me today are Lorraine Hawley from Archer Daniels Midland, Bill Westman from North American Meat Institute, Colby Iman from the Schooler Company, Jim Sutter from the U.S. Soybean Export Council. And we're fortunate to have Minister Zhu Hong from the Minister of Commercial Affairs of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China. So we've got a great panel to talk about agribusiness today. So Lorraine, I'm going to turn it over to you for just a few minutes, 3 to 4 or 5 minutes of where you see U.S. China exports from or U.S. China trade policy from a agri-processor, agribusiness standpoint, and where you see the opportunities.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I want to first thank the U.S. Asia Institute for organizing this forum. It's really a pleasure to represent ADM. And before we dive into the discussion on U.S. China ag trade, I wanted to just quickly provide some background on ADM, the 21st century ADM, and to put some context around our view on China. So many of you know ADM well. And in many ways, we are still the ADM that you know. However, we've also evolved from the company of only 5 or 10 years ago while retaining our culture and commitment to our customers around the globe, of course, including those in China. Around the world, our leadership and all of our employees are aligned around one mission, and that is to unlock the power of nature and enrich the quality of life through good nutrition. And this mission really reflects a transformation into a 21st century ADM that does more for more people than ever before. So today, ADM is one of the world's leading human and animal nutrition companies with an expansive pantry of ingredients and solutions. And our company is a pioneer in health and wellness and sustainable, renewable industrial solutions. And we are still a premier global agriculture food supply chain manager, matching local needs with global capabilities. And as a company that does all of this across the food and agriculture chain, we're optimistic and excited about the roles that the US and China can play to work together to improve global agriculture supply and output. So from our standpoint, the timing of this conference could not be better. As a partner for America's farmers, we're proud of our company's role in linking the bounty of America's heartland to markets around the world, of course, China. And I should explain that our outlook on China and the role of agriculture in China and the overall bilateral relationship is shaped by our perspective as one of the world's, again, largest ag producers, but also because of our footprint in China. So actually, ADM started in China back in 1994, or rather 1995, with an animal feed premix plant in Dalian. So we started then, and then since then, as China's middle class has grown, which Jason just talked about, diets have shifted dramatically, and per capita spending on meat and meat products has doubled since the year 2000. So this increased demand for meat and meat products has in turn created more demand for protein meal from soybeans and other oil seeds, which are one of ADM's primary export products. And because of our deep experience as a partner to China, we see huge potential and opportunities to enhance and build upon our U.S.-China agriculture trade relationship. So I'll leave further comments on the more granular aspects of the U.S.-China agriculture trade relationship and some of the things that ADM thinks that we can do to continue building upon that as we move into the future for our Q&A session. And I'm looking forward to the discussion today. So thanks again for having me.
Lorraine, thanks for being here. And I'm going to come back to you on that next steps question.
Perfect.
Next, Bill Westman from the North American Meat Institute.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me for the U.S.-China Policy Series. I represent the North American Meat Institute. We represent meat packers of beef, pork, lamb, and turkey products. And we also represent the companies that build and service meat processing plants. We have a long history of working with China, both in terms of our companies investing in China, as well as those companies that have built and serviced processing plants. We've been doing that for more than 20 years in terms of working with our partners there to improve the meat processing capability. Since 2013, we've been working with the China Meat Association through an organization that we helped to create called the U.S.-China Agriculture and Food Partnership. And I co-lead that partnership with Joel Haggard of the U.S. Meat Export Federation, a working group called the Animal and Animal Products Working Group. This partnership was founded in the spirit of cooperation, technical assistance, and sharing best practices with the goal of improving food safety, food security, and sustainability. I think it's been proven that markets that have strong agriculture become good markets for our products. And I think this is playing out, as was discussed earlier by Kent Backus, that we have tremendous opportunities for exporting beef to China now that the market is open, the tariffs are down, and this provides tremendous opportunities, I think, for livestock producers in Nebraska, as well as several beef processing facilities that are members in Nebraska. There's just great opportunities. So our focus on this in this partnership is really on the entire value chain, from production all the way through to distribution of products to consumers. So we like to say that the emphasis is on products from farm to chopsticks in China. And it's really starting to take off, as everyone knows and has been discussed. We've had a difficult couple of years with the trade wars. I think in China, the government was involved in a reorganization of all of their departments, which tended to slow things down. And then we had the COVID situation, which is a tremendous disruption for everyone around the world. But I think in 2021, all of us are turning the corner. We're very encouraged by our contacts in China. They're poised and ready to work with us again. And we have some great activities, I think, coming up towards the end of the year and into 2022. So again, I think it's just a tremendous market for our meat exporters, but it's also an opportunity to work together in a spirit of cooperation on food safety, food security, and sustainability. So thank you very much. I'll stop there, and happy to join the discussion. So thank you.
That's great, Bill. We'll be back at you here in just a minute. Colby Iman from the Schooler Company.
To kind of introduce the Schooler Company, it is a Nebraska corporation, 130 years old. It's employee owned. We have 14 plus locations throughout Nebraska, and about 100 locations throughout North America and Asia, including an office in Shanghai. We've been doing business in China in various forms for over 20 years now. I myself, here to give some background, have been trading directly with China for the last 13 years. From Nebraska directly, I've been a part of trading both soybeans, corn, wheat, and sorghum that were grown in Nebraska and went direct to China. And I can say that because the majority of my career has been in the container shipping. So with some traceability from some of the Schooler assets, either loaded in directly in Nebraska and shipped via container, or loaded via rail through our facility in LA. We have that traceability. So have truly been honored to be a part of connecting the Nebraska farmer to China consumers. And I also want to bring up one other thing Schooler does is we do actually import food goods from China as well. So this is a two-way trade going both directions on the Pacific Oceans. So while we will obviously take part in the whole grains and oilseed export back to China, it's a very important part of our business. We also are buying some protein sweeteners, pea and soy isolates. That's become a nice business for us in terms of importing that from the production facilities in China back into consumer goods here in the United States. So it is ag trade can go both ways. And I think we'll continue to see that grow as diets expand here on both sides of the Pacific. You asked what was predictable. And the one thing I want to point out, and with my experience doing business in China, is what's predictable is really the customer base is top notch in China. I've traded with over 30 countries, and I put China right there on top in terms of the integrity of the buyers there. It's an easy place to do business in terms of an advanced banking system. The infrastructure top notch for the 5 largest ports in the world are in China. So it's a great place for us to do business as an exporter. And certainly there's been some hurdles on both sides with policy that we can get over. But I wanted to hit on that predictable. The predictable is the buyers and the importers in China really can't be beat from an integrity standpoint for me doing business. So I do want to highlight that as what is predictable. And with that, look forward to taking some questions here from the audience.
Colby, we'll be back to you with some questions, and thanks for doing something predictable. That's a note of optimism for us here. Jim Sutter for the U.S. Soybean Export Council.
Well, thanks to the organizers for the invitation to participate in this forum day, and what a great event. I'm honored to be a part of it. USEC is a trade organization that represents U.S. soy farmers and the whole export supply chain. We've got a couple of our members here on the panel today, so I'm very pleased to be a part of this. You know, China is a protein powerhouse, and I believe that some part of this is due to our ongoing collaboration efforts. It's been said, we've had the details in previous speakers, but China was one of the few countries to meet the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization's target to cut hunger rates by half. Over the past decade, China has successfully reduced the percent of undernourished people from 16% to just 8%. In China, meat consumption, excluding aquaculture, has increased from 7 million tons back in 1975, so quite a while ago, but to 86.5 million tons in 2018. So no wonder Bill's interested in the meat industry and getting meat into China. People there are big meat consumers. You know, and this type of significant progress on nutrition and food security doesn't happen unless there's a plan. It takes leaders, it takes policies, and it takes lots of work together. I believe that the cooperation between U.S. agricultural interests and the Chinese has certainly been a part of that. It started, and I've heard different years talked about, but back in 1977, our records would show that a farm delegation from the U.S. went to China, and a delegation from there came to the U.S. And then in 1980, the U.S. Soybean Export Council, under a different name then, we were operating under ASA International Marketing, set up its first organization in China and started its efforts. And today we have a great team of people there that work on all kinds of things: livestock production, aquaculture production, market access issues, trying to make sure that all of those things are working smoothly. And we've been there ever since 1980. An example of the type of work we do, we would take to them different technologies. We've recently taken, a few years ago now, but an aquaculture production system that allowed them to triple their production in a specific pond while actually having a reduced environmental impact. So it's that kind of thing that we take there. Since we did that, the government of China has invested in that work, and literally now there are thousands of those sites across China. And it's good because every time you get one of those installed, it increases their production, and that increases demand for soy and other agricultural commodities. You know, so it's been said in several presentations that China is a big soy importer. They're 60% of the global trade in soy. So they are a huge importer. And in the US, we export about 60% of the soy that we produce in one form or another. So there's sort of a fit there. A couple fun facts. In 1995, that's when the first soy imports started in China. So imagine growing from the very first imports in 95, not all that long ago, to today 60% of global trade. In 1999, China became the #2 market for US soy, surpassing Japan and Mexico. And in 2003, they became the #1 market, surpassing the EU. And they've never looked back. They've been important to us. You know, it's been talked about the trade war, and US soy did get caught up in that. We saw sharp declines in exports, but our organization stayed engaged in China. My last in-person trip to China was in January of 2020, and it was good to see Bobby today earlier on the screen. That was the last time I was together with him. And when I planned the trip, we didn't know it, but we were able to have a bit of a celebration party of the phase 1 signing in Shanghai while I was there in China. So it's important to maintain those in-person relationships, we believe. And we want to keep this phase 1 trade deal going. We heard many people talk about that earlier today. For years, we've talked about our mutual goal of helping China achieve sustainable food security and food safety. And let me focus on one component of that we see becoming much more important in China these days, and that's sustainability or protection of the environment. And I think that's probably no surprise. I mean, we see people the world over becoming much more interested in knowing where their food comes from, how it was produced, what's the footprint that it's leaving as it's being produced. And it's no different in China. And fortunately for US soy and for Nebraska soy farmers and soy farmers across the US, we have a very good message there, and we have a very good track record. So we're able to verify the sustainability of the US soy that we export if it meets certain conditions. And of the imports that China's made year to date, 42% of their imports have been verified sustainable. So my time is running out. So let me close in my comments. But I want to assure those in the audience, we've been talking a lot about China. This is a China conference, but our organization works in many countries aside from just China. So as Governor Ricketts pointed out in his earlier comments, it is important to have a diversification strategy, and we certainly have one of those. But this is a China conference. That's why we're focusing on that. So let me just close with a couple more things. Coming back to China, I want to congratulate all of those that are in the industry there. Lorraine talked about how what ADM has done in growing there. But the China industry's created the world's largest soybean crush industry, the largest feed production industry, the largest livestock and aquaculture industries in the world in really a pretty short period of time. And I think if you talk about future opportunities, we can just watch those things continue to grow, and that spells opportunity. We do appreciate the partnership we've had for the last 40 years, and certainly look forward to the next 40. As Secretary Albright stated earlier, ag trade is important, and soybeans are at the forefront. And we look forward to continuing to be part of the ballast in the sometimes stormy relationship, the overall relationship between the US and China. And I think what is predictable is that the Chinese parties that I know and the industry members and the associations that I've gotten to know over the years, they are interested in relationships, and relationships are very important to people in China. So we want to continue to have a good relationship there. Thanks, and I'll turn it back to you, Brian.
Hey, thank you very much, Jim. And then I definitely want to turn the mic over to Minister Hong from his view in terms of where we're at right now and where it's going from an agribusiness standpoint.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. We are here to have a discussion on a very important topic on agribusiness. As the previous panelists all indicated, that China and the US are the world's two biggest economy. The relationship between us must be properly handled. Since the Biden administration took office, fortunately, there have been some positive interactions between China and the US. The presidents of the two countries had an important phone conversation on the eve of the Chinese Lunar New Year, charting the course for our bilateral relationship. The Anchorage dialogue kicked off face-to-face interactions at a high level, although at the opening ceremony, there's some dramatic things happen. On April 22nd, President Xi attended the Leaders Summit on Climate at the invitation of President Biden, demonstrating the sense of responsibility of our two countries in joining hands to tackle global challenges. As far as I know, the Chinese Minister of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, Mr. Tang Renjian, also had a very constructive phone conversation with Secretary Vilsack not long ago. And the main topic is how to cooperate in the agriculture sector. It is widely recognized that agricultural trade between our two countries is highly complementary and a significant part of our bilateral economic and trade relations. China is the world's largest importers of the agricultural products, and the US the largest exporter. From 2001 to 2020, the US annual export of agricultural products to China increased by tenfold, with an average growth rate of nearly 16%. Notably, US agricultural export to China has maintained a long-term surplus. Meanwhile, The agriculture chapter is an important part of Phase 1 trade agreement. Despite the severe challenge of COVID-19 in 2020, China continues to expand agriculture trade with the US. In 2020, China purchased more than $28 billion of US agriculture products, an increase of $14.9 billion over 2019, and 108% year-on-year growth. And the bilateral agricultural trade volume has reached a record high, according to USTR and USDA statistics. Up to now, 40 items related to market access for food and agriculture products under Phase 1 agreement have been completed on time and with high quality. Looking into the future, agriculture trade between China and the United States still has huge potential, with Chinese people starting to upgrade food consumption and improving dietary structure by importing high quality food. China's expansion of agriculture import is an inevitable and irreversible trend. I believe we should expect not only getting back to normal, but an even brighter future. And we certainly look forward to working more closely with states like Nebraska and to enhance bilateral agriculture cooperation. I stopped here. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to ask a follow-up question to both you and Jim, because you both hit on the subject, which is one of the issues that we've had, obviously, is during the pandemic. It's been very difficult to have in-person relationships, and certainly our governor is one who is more than willing to travel the country or travel the world and sell Nebraska goods. How much of a barrier has it been not to have these in-person discussions as in this last year? And I'll start with you, Jim.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, Brian. And it's certainly been a challenge for us, because that's what a key part of what our organization does is organizes in-person events. But we've pivoted and we've done an awful lot of these virtual type events. And while they're not the same, I think they are a way to stay in touch with people. We have every week, we have a couple of key customer interactions where we have a Zoom meeting with a key customer from somewhere in the world, and we get a soybean farmer from somewhere in the US and maybe an industry member, depending on the situation, and some of our directors, and we have 2 of these a week. And so we've been maintaining this contact just using a different method. I think everybody recognizes that they would like to get back to in person. So I would say it's, I think people have put up with it for now. I don't think it's stopped business, but we need to get back to whatever the new normal is. Thanks.
And Minister, from your standpoint, what can U.S. agribusinesses do to stay in touch and stay connected right now?
Thank you for your question. Actually, people-to-people exchange is very important for our bilateral agriculture trade. Actually, the 2 countries are discussing about the possibilities of making traveling easier. A new development here in the embassy is that travelers fully vaccinated with Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson vaccines are accepted to travel to China with the letter of commitment on COVID-19 vaccination. Of course, travelers still need to upload their nucleic acid and antibody test result to get green health code. We also hope that it will be easier for traveler inoculated with the Chinese vaccines. It is still a question mark to travel to the US. Generally speaking, I'm optimistic that future policy will help facilitate such traveling. This is in line with China's general policy of opening up to the outside world and promoting cross-border improvement of personnel, goods and services. This can be seen in many other cases. I believe the future trend of policy relying on how well we can get control of the pandemic. You look at our neighboring country is still dramatically increased every day. It is make people concerned. We also need to tackle our how bilateral engagement goes. We believe that people-to-people exchange play an important role as we try to bring our bilateral relationship back to the right track. I sincerely wish that through our joint effort, we can return to normal as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Messenger. We have a question from the audience, which is interesting for me, which is much of agribusiness is going to value-added products, but the real question is, what is the future for exporting bulk commodities as compared to value-added products? As we go forward, do we see one growing faster than the other, or is this something that both we see considerable expansion in the Chinese market? And I'm gonna turn to you, Bill Westman, from a meat standpoint on that question, because it's interesting. You raised the point of value-added products. Where do you see the bulk commodities versus value-added products in the livestock area?
Well, certainly China's trying to recover from devastating African swine fever, which continues to affect the countryside, as Jim mentioned. But I think with the opening of the beef market, the reduction in the tariffs, we're already seeing the change, as Kent Backus noted, and we think there's tremendous potential for high quality beef going into China. This is just, when I was there as counselor 2007 to 2010, I was told, we'll buy everything we could possibly can when the market opens up. And I think that's what's going to happen for high quality beef going into China. We're just poised and ready to go.
Thank you, Bill. Colby, I'm going to turn to supply chain because you mentioned supply chain. From the standpoint of the possible growth in this market and the possible growth in exports, are you concerned at all about the supply chain infrastructure? And I know I had a question on the potential U.S. infrastructure legislation. Are you concerned at all about infrastructure as it might relate to supply chain? It sounds like the answer is no with respect to China, but I just want to ask the question.
Well, always concerned because the supply chain is two-sided, right? So I'm primarily in the container supply chain. There's been major disruptions there. And some of that is from some of the disruptions that have come about because of COVID and the catch up that we've had here, trying to rebuild some consumer good supply chains that have cascaded down to what's affected our exports. But we're always concerned with what the infrastructure is, and we always feel there's a need to continue to build that, whether that's in the US, but also in China. But I do think that there's opportunity to continue to grow that. And one area with China in particular is growth and investment within China on upriver terminals, both bulk and containerized. And I see a lot of opportunity for US goods to make their way further inland in China. So while China has just top-notch port on the coast infrastructure, and they've done a fantastic job investing in that over the last 30 years, there's still growth opportunity getting upriver to spots like Wuhan and Chongqing, and these are huge cities and huge population centers that I think we've got the ability to meet bulk and value-added products up into that.
Thank you, Colby. Lorraine, I have to ask you a question from your standpoint at ADM, sort of what's next steps moving forward practically to try to enhance this relationship?
Sure, that's a great question. So, as we've all noted here, the U.S. and U.S. and China trade has been predicated and it has grown because of China's growing population and the growing demand for high quality products. So China's middle class today is more than 700 million people, close to twice the size of the U.S. population. And the consumption patterns are growing, evolving, diversifying, and younger and wealthier Chinese consumers want newer and higher quality foods, which are better for the environment and more healthy, raised on high quality feed and made from the best ingredients, and better tasting and more conveniently accessible. So the US and China have the opportunity to meet those needs together, and American agriculture is certainly a key source of premium food and feed products. And companies like ADM provide a range of products from dietary fibers to citrus flavors to meet the new needs of China's middle class. So another answer to the previous question is that we see both growing. We see both your traditional commodities, but we also see this new value-added product line with significant potential to grow as far as exports are concerned. Second, the US and China really have an opportunity as global leaders to partner together to make agriculture production and consumption more sustainable and efficient. So there are three areas in that context that we're very focused on at ADM. The first is regenerative ag, which is a focus on supporting farmers and adopting practices that address water quality, soil health, such as cover crops, reduced tillage, complex crop rotations, and nutrient management to reduce soil erosion, nutrient runoff, and even greenhouse gas emissions. The second area is food waste. And I mean, we're all familiar with this issue, and it's been recently estimated that food waste loss causes a global economic, environmental, and social cost of $2.6 trillion a year, and is responsible for 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So reducing food waste across the food value chain is critical to reducing the environmental impact of agriculture by reducing the total amount of water, land, and other resources that are required to feed a growing global community. And China and the US really have an opportunity to partner here. And then the subject of climate change. That's an area that's getting a lot of attention right now. The US and China have committed to partner together as leaders on this issue. And climate change is one that has implications, for ADM's employees, our stakeholders, the communities where we operate, and all aspects of our business. And so collaboration is really needed across the entire food and ag value chain to slow the negative impacts of climate change. And by working together with China to promote sustainable agriculture practices, support climate-friendly initiatives like carbon sequestration, reducing our carbon footprint of our operations, and innovating planet-friendly products for global consumers and customers, together our two countries can really make a big difference here. So we see, that there's huge potential for an ever stronger partnership that benefits both countries, both consumers, and ranchers, farmers, and food manufacturers, in the United States, but then of course in China as well.
Thanks, Lorraine. I've got a question from the audience, which I'm going to editorialize just a little bit, but I'm going to direct this at Minister Hong. From China's standpoint, as it looks at its relationship with the United States agriculture over the long term, does China have long-term objectives in terms of this agriculture import, agriculture export relationship with the United States that goes well beyond the next few years? And what would be that long-term vision?
Thank you for your question. Actually, we look forward to expand our bilateral trade, especially in the agriculture sector. As I mentioned, that in these areas, our bilateral trade increased very rapidly. But now the main obstacles is that it depends on our two sides. Now we have already have the first stage agreement. Whether we are going to have the second stage agreement is still up to the two sides, especially the US side. I think from China side, based on our big demand and are willing to expand our bilateral trade, we are ready to further expand our bilateral trade. There's no problem from China. Now, right now, the biggest obstacle still is the tariff imposed by the US side. according to so-called 301 articles. So this is a big obstacle. Before we talk about how to expand our bilateral trade, we need to move out these big obstacles. I sincerely wish that this issue can be tackled very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question from the audience is, what reforms should the Biden administration push for at the WTO? And so, Bill, from your standpoint, any specific things that you think the Biden administration should be pushing at the WTO?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is the dispute settlement panel. And this is, I think, has proven to be very important for the United States in adjudicating agricultural issues with many countries. We don't win everything, we don't lose everything, but I think in general, we have benefited from having a court of appeal that can objectively adjudicate some of these issues we have with countries. We've tried to address this in terms of new trade agreements like the U.S. China, U.S. Canada, Mexico agreement, and so forth. But really, to have a strong dispute settlement body, I think, would be to our advantage in agriculture. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Bill. As we start to wind down the last few minutes, I've just got a couple quick questions. You'll have to forgive me for this one, and I beg your pardon for this one, but I am the president of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce, so I have to plug Nebraska just a little bit. I grew up in the western part of Nebraska, which for many who don't know, sits on the biggest puddle in the world. An underground reservoir of water, which is some of the finest water in the world. And I think that water makes our livestock better. I think it makes our crops better. I think it's that combined with the sustainable water research that we have here in Nebraska, it's a differentiator for Nebraska products. How important is this food quality issue? And tell me, am I nuts to think that I can brand Nebraska based on our water? And Jim, I'm gonna throw that question at you.
Well, great. Thank you. I appreciate that question. And I grew up just across the border over there in Colorado, and we were on the kind of edge of the aquifer. So we were always kind of jealous of Nebraska that had most of the water. But I think you were on the right track to be thinking about this quality issue. One of the key things that we try to do is demonstrate the value of U.S. soy. And it's the same for all products. The way that it's produced, the way that it's handled, the way that it's stored, the way that it's transported, it really is different than products from other places. And I would just encourage you, and I haven't dug specifically into Nebraska and the water, but I think if you can dig into the data and find the scientific information behind that demonstrates that there is a difference. Again, I think as was the point was made by several of my fellow panelists, that consumers today in China and in other places are looking for ways to know they're getting a better product, to know that there's something different. And I think if you can find some points of difference as you do that, I encourage you to strongly do that. And then there's a company like the one that Colby is with that can very effectively take a product from one spot in Nebraska to a customer in China that wants it and wants those differentiated characteristics. And you've got the makings of a good business deal. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Jim, and thank you, panelists. Thanks for making this really interesting, and I have outworn my welcome, so I'm going to turn the program back at this point.
Thank you, Brian, for really a great job moderating a really informative and insightful panel. And thanks to all of our panelists for sharing your expertise on agribusiness and U.S. China agricultural trade. We have now completed all three of our sessions. And as I wrap up today's dialogue, I want to thank you for joining the U.S. Asia Institute's Forum on Agricultural Trade with China, based here in the Lincoln Marriott Cornhusker Hotel. And now I'll pass the mic back to our co-chairs of the event, Glenn and Andy.
Today's event has been a most interesting and important conversation. I'd like to express the appreciation of the U.S. Asia Institute to all those who have made this important discussion on U.S. China agricultural trade possible. A special thanks to Governor Ricketts and his Chief of Staff, Matt Miltenberger, for the warm welcome to Nebraska. Many thanks to all of our wonderful speakers and panelists for sharing your time and expertise. And also thank you to the hardworking teams behind the scenes, including the Cornhusker Marriott Tech Team, Whit Askew, Joy Burks, and Madeline Palmieri of Team Subject Matter, and of course, Allison Edwards of AE Strategies. We could not have done this without you. Thanks to the organizing task force who spent countless hours pulling this together. JT Foley, John Robert Bloom, Daryl Nirenberg, Allison Edwards, and Rachel McKnight. Your vision became a reality today. And lastly, thank you to Andy Aboud and Las Vegas Sands for making this important discussion possible. The U.S. Asia Institute is greatly appreciative of all that you do in person, all of you who joined in person and virtually as well. We look forward to having you with us at future discussions and welcome your thoughts and input. Andy?
Thank you, Glenn. And I think it was a fascinating panel, I have to say. All of the panels were quite interesting, but I think the message of the day, at least that I got, is that a predictable and boring relationship with China is good for both countries. And the common theme here is predictability. And I think that is what we're seeing all across the country today, is that we need more predictability, not only our policies with China, but in our policies overall. In this, all of our panelists and all of our speakers today demonstrated the importance of the relationship between the United States and China, that these dialogues are going to be mutually beneficial, and that the importance of this relationship is important financially and for the quality of life. What really we learned today, which a lot of us know, but reemphasize, is how important the agricultural relationship is for the quality of life of both countries, financially and for the welfare and benefit of both countries. So this is our first dialogue event that we have sponsored. It's obviously critical that these continue. This has been a great engagement dialogue. And as I referred to in my opening remarks, no problem has ever been solved through less communication. So as we emerge from the pandemic and we can travel across the country, as many people that are here today, we're having dinner in a restaurant for the first time in months. And as our countries emerge and we re-engage and we can see each other again, not only in the United States, but the United States and China, I can see that our relationship between the two countries will improve. I again want to thank all of our panelists and speakers. They were outstanding. I want to thank the staff from the Cornhusker Hotel here in Lincoln, the staff at Encore, and also my team again. I also want to thank Maria Christina Lin, who's back in Las Vegas, J.R. Bloom, J.T. Foley, Daryl Nirenberg, Whitaker Askew and the team at Subject Matter, especially Governor Ricketts and Matt Miltenberger, and of course, Mary Sue, Rachel, and Glenn from USAI, and especially Allison Edwards, who has endured all kinds of dietary delights here in Nebraska, many of which she's not planning on having. We're going to take her out for another steak dinner again tonight. I want to thank everyone for tuning in across the country and in China. This was an important dialogue. And with that, I thank you all, and we will tune off. Thank you.